Morning, everyone. Welcome to Grace Cafe. Be sure to get your cup of coffee, your tea, your water, whatever it is that you enjoy this time of day. Sit back and relax. We're going to have a great conversation here in just a moment with our guest. You know, our founding fathers said religious liberty is our first and most foundational right. It serves as the catalyst of all subsequent freedoms. When religious liberty is threatened or attacked, every other freedom is endangered, and our first freedom is lost. It will be gone forever. So it is important that we know about it, know what it is, know how to defend it, how to protect it. And I am so excited to have with us today one of the attorneys from First Liberty organization, Lathan Watts. He's a director of legal communications for First Liberty Institute. And I think for those of you who don't know, First Liberty is the largest legal organization exclusively dedicated to defending religious liberty. They continue to lead the fight for religious liberty across every state and every generation of Americans. And Lathan received his Juris Doctor from the University of Mississippi and received his Bachelor of Arts in History from Harding University, Searcy, Arkansas, my hometown. So, Lathan, welcome to Grace Cafe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it is a pleasure. And we found your little video on the First Liberty website talking about the exercise of our freedom of religion. And we have posted that on our Facebook page, and I hope others will check that out and to see the star that's with us today. And as he allowed us to join him in his workout session, but it was very good, very pointed, and so needed. There's a lot of misunderstandings around our first liberties, isn't there?
There really is. That video is kind of maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it is designed to just sort of talk about what the Free Exercise Clause means. I mean, the First Amendment protects religious liberty first for a reason that you just alluded to. And it has basically two clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause just meaning there will be no official church of the United States of America. And the Free Exercise Clause meaning government cannot stop its citizens from living according to what they believe. And that's what that video seeks to demonstrate by showing physical exercise and making the point that exercise always implies activity. So the Free Exercise Clause protects your right to not just believe what you want or go to church wherever you want, but to actually live according to what you believe every day of the week, not just Sundays.
Yes. Yes, and as you talk to people today, just in general, and I find this particularly, sadly, among a lot of our younger generation, when you ask them about our religious liberties, they will say, "Well, yeah, you can go to whatever church you want to go to, and you can believe whatever you want to believe." And in their minds, Lathan, that's where it ends. That's where it ends. And so it seems as a result of that, there's a lot more offense today regarding our expression of faith than there was many years ago. I know when I was a child, I mean, I think of all the way our faith was expressed in public school, in the public place. Now people are offended. So what has caused that change in grasping our expression of faith and now being offended by it?
Well, I think there's a lot of factors. Some, as we already alluded to, is just a misunderstanding of what the Constitution protects and what religious freedom really means. Unfortunately, there's been some bad case law in that area that sort of reinforced that mistaken notion. But thankfully, we just actually won a Supreme Court case that I think is going to really protect religious freedom in a way that we haven't seen in maybe, well, I know in my lifetime, because the decision really is a return to the actual text of the First Amendment and the founders' intent when it comes to the First Amendment and religious freedom. So I think there is a common misconception of what that looks like, and then that was sort of reinforced by some bad court decisions, but we are in the process of overturning those and returning to the original intent of the founders. And I think people are going to be experiencing a level of religious freedom that really they haven't experienced in their lifetime if they're my age or younger.
Well, I certainly pray so. And I want to talk about that case in just a moment that was won at the Supreme Court because it is so significant. But before we get there, I think part of the reason some of these cases are brought up is a misunderstanding about the separation of church and state. There seems to be this belief that this is the separation of church and state is found in the First Amendment. It is not. But help us to understand where that came from and how that's being used inappropriately today.
Certainly. So the phrase separation of church and state first appeared in a letter from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association. They had written a letter to him expressing their concern over their state's weak religious freedom protections. And in his response to them, he mentioned that the federal government, which he had his influence on, that he was comforted by the fact that there would always be a separation of church and state. And that's where that phrase was first sort of brought into the American conversation. Now, not until really the 1940s, I believe, there was a Supreme Court case where a justice cited that phrase in his opinion. And I think that was maybe the beginning of people starting to think that separation of church and state is in our Constitution. The First Amendment is the religious liberty section of the First Amendment is actually very short and it's very clear. It says Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the founders' intent with the First Amendment was that there would be no national church. There would be no official church of the United States of America. You have to think they just fought a war with one of the greatest empires in history that had the Church of England that they were taxed to support, and they did not want that here. And that's why they wrote that into the Constitution, that there will be no, there will be no establishment of a religion. There would be no official church of the United States. And then the Free Exercise Clause, as we've already talked about, was designed to prohibit government from impeding the citizens in any way of living according to their faith. So you had, multiple variations of Christianity, of Judaism. There were lots of different religions being practiced in the 13 colonies at the time and then later states. And they wanted to make sure that the federal government would never have any role in impeding the citizens living according to what they believe. And that's really what the First Amendment was intended to do. And it, as we've said, kind of over time, had been misconstrued and definitions get twisted and because of some precedents, some Supreme Court cases, you ended up with the Supreme Court really doing its best, honestly, to try and interpret that the First Amendment. And there was a case back in early 1970s, I want to say 70, 71, called Lemon versus Kurtzman, where the Supreme Court tried to establish a framework for evaluating cases that dealt with the Establishment Clause. And in Lemon versus Kurtzman, they laid out this three-part test, and so ever since then it was known as the Lemon test. And we like to say, ever since then, lower courts have been trying to make lemonade out of this lemon for 40 to 50 years now. Yes. But that test really created more confusion than it clarified. It's a three-part test, and if whatever the subject matter in question was, if it failed any one of those three, then it was ruled unconstitutional. And it got to the point where just about every time someone applied the test, whatever was in question was determined to be unconstitutional. So it kind of became this test that nothing could pass. And it actually, instead of ensuring that the government was neutral when it came to religion, it created hostility towards religion.
Yeah.
And so that's where you get all of these kinds of cases about, can you have a Ten Commandments monument on public grounds, or
a nativity scene at Christmas,
a nativity scene at Christmas time, right?
Yeah.
Can you have a candy cane at a Christmas party in school that has a message about Jesus on it? All of those types of cases sort of came from this really bad decision. And one of the the parts of that decision was this reasonable observer. One of the parts of the test would a reasonable observer think that government has become too entangled in religion? Well, in reality, what that created was the offended observer status. And so
Mm-hmm.
all someone had to
Mm-hmm.
do was be offended by something, and then they would go to the courthouse and try to get it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So we just, as you mentioned, we just won a Supreme Court case a couple of weeks ago
Yes.
where we defended a nearly 100-year-old World War I memorial on behalf of the American Legion, our client. And in that decision, the majority opinion has finally, basically once and for all, said we are no longer going to use this lemon test to evaluate these
Amen.
kinds of cases. And
That is
the American
wonderful.
Legion, it is, it's going to be a landmark turning point in history type
Yes.
of decision. The American Legion's already identified 3,000 memorials across the country that are safe now because of this decision. And
Wow.
with that decision and letting people know, especially lower courts, that
Mm-hmm.
you should not use lemon and the lemon test anymore, that offended observer status is now very much in question also. So people who would, like our case where the American Humanist Association drove by this nearly 100-year-old memorial and got offended by it and filed a lawsuit to tear it down, they're going to have a hard time proving that they even have standing to bring these kinds of lawsuits anymore. So that's why I
Yes.
say this is going to be a turning point in history. And because that case, the Lemon versus Kirkman, is older than I am, I can
Mm.
easily say that I'm living today with more freedom than I've ever had in my life.
Wow. And I think the American people have not really awakened to that because you don't hear much about this in the national news. It's one of the reasons I'm so grateful we can talk about it here in social media because people need to know that our religious freedoms are under attack. However, they're also being protected in a beautiful way by folks like yourself and from First Liberty. In this particular memorial was a cross, and the cross is what was founded so offensive to the humanists, wasn't it? And I remember Kelly Shackelford talking about, my goodness, if this has to be torn down, is Arlington Cemetery next? I mean, all the crosses that you think of that are there to memorialize our heroes, and it was never offensive for years and years, almost 100 years.
Exactly right.
So I am thankful that progress has been made there. A lot of folks assume that religion, if it offends someone, if our speech offends someone, then the First Amendment is there to protect from that. But it doesn't protect someone from being offended, does it?
No, the Constitution was written to protect your rights, not your feelings. And I see things on a daily basis that bother me, but I don't go sue
Sure.
anyone over it. You know,
Right.
and
All right.
you're exactly right in that um, assessment of had the Supreme Court not taken the case or not overturned the Fourth Circuit, Arlington National Cemetery is in the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals actually ruled against the Bladensburg Memorial, and it would have had to come down. In fact, at oral argument at the Fourth Circuit, one of the judges suggested that if we just chop the arms off the cross, that would somehow make it constitutional.
Oh
And
my.
you're right in that there are, there's the Canadian Cross of Sacrifice in Arlington, there's the Argonne Cross in Arlington, and there's even, they could have gone in and said, well, we need to sandblast the word God off the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery,
Mm-hmm.
had the Supreme Court not acted the way they did.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the history of that memorial, it's one of the very first World War I memorials ever constructed in our country. And the
Mm-hmm.
mothers, the Gold Star moms who wanted the memorial built and raised the money to do it, they chose the shape of the cross for a very specific reason. They wanted it to look and appear like the gravestones their sons were buried under in Europe. Because in the early
Mm-hmm.
1920s, they had no way of knowing if they would ever be able to visit their son's actual grave where they were buried on the battlefields in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
or if their sons' bodies would ever be returned to the United States. So they considered the monument to be a symbolic gravestone for their sons. That's why they chose the shape of the cross. And the American Legion, our client, donated the property originally for the monument to be built on. And it sat there on private property for many, many years until I think the late 40s, early 1950s, when the state of Maryland was expanding a highway, but they didn't want to disturb the memorial, so the highway literally curves around it. So now the memorial is kind of in the median of a highway. So the state took
Right.
over control of the property to maintain the property in the right of way of the highway. And that's what the humanists based their claim, their lawsuit on, was that this is a religious symbol on government property.
Wow.
And you know, we actually won at the trial court level, and then they appealed to the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit ruled in their favor. We appealed to the Supreme Court, and then we just got that victory 2 weeks ago. So it's
Wow.
been a busy couple of weeks here around our
Yes,
office,
it
but it's been
has.
kind of busy.
Well, and congratulations on that victory for all of us, truly. Well, I want to bring it down even to a more personal level. Our Grace School of Theology, the seminary that has this broadcast, we share the gospel around the world. We teach leaders to share the love of Christ with others, training leaders to train leaders. And so religious liberty is important for us beginning here in the United States to be able to share what we believe. And I was struck by a case where there was a gentleman who was trying to lead a Bible study in his apartment complex.
Correct.
And yes, and so he was facing eviction for doing so. Can you tell us a little bit more about that case? I may not have given you
Certainly.
enough to recall.
That's our client, Ken Hauge, who lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Okay.
Ken is a retired Lutheran minister, and when he moved into this kind of senior living apartment complex, there were people there who had been wanting to organize a Bible study. And so when he moved into the complex, they asked him, as a retired minister, if he would lead the Bible study. And he was happy to do so. And so he did what anyone else would do in an apartment complex. He went to reserve the community room where you can have meetings or whatever. And originally he was told, well, that's okay, but you need to don't advertise it as a Bible study. You need to call it like a book study or a book club or something. And
Mm.
he was like, yeah, kind of rolled his eyes, but okay, whatever. But then the apartment complex issued new rules about the community room where they said any and all religious activity is banned. So trying to meet the needs of these people that wanted to have a Bible study and comply with this rule, even though the rule was patently unconstitutional and illegal, he decided to do the Bible study in one of the attendees' apartments. So
Mhm.
in their private home, in their residence. And that's what he did. And then he gets a letter from the apartment complex telling him that if he did it again, he could face eviction for doing so. So we got in contact with the Hauges, and we represent them, and we've been trying to work with the apartment complex to resolve this situation. The state of Virginia, basically the state version of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, the state agency, there is investigating the situation, and we have now filed lawsuit in federal court in Virginia to basically hold the apartment complex accountable.
Of
It
course.
is unconscionable that anyone would think you could tell someone they cannot study the Bible in their own home.
Oh,
And
it's frightening.
clearly his right of free exercise has been violated.
Hmm.
And so we're going to federal court to hold the apartment complex accountable for what they've done.
Of
And
course.
you know, we're going to fight for Ken and not just him, because if this is happening there, it is likely happening elsewhere. In fact, we have a very similar situation in a senior living facility in Florida that
Mm.
we are fighting almost the exact same set of facts in Florida. And the
In a
Department of
senior
Housing and
living
Urban
center.
Development, yeah, a senior, like a retirement condo complex,
Hmm.
basically.
Right,
So the
right.
Department of Housing and Urban Development is investigating that because these are clear violations of the Fair Housing Act, which plainly states you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of religion when it comes to housing. And so that's what's going on in both of these cases. So we're fighting for both of them, and when we win a case, we obviously protect the rights of that individual. But as you alluded to earlier, when we win, it protects all of us, and it protects people of all faiths.
Yes,
First
yes.
Liberty Institute will defend people of any faith anywhere in the country. Any faith that's being practiced consistent with the Constitution, we will defend your right to do so, whatever
Right.
that faith may be. We have a lot of Orthodox Jewish clients right now. We have defended Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Native American Sweat Lodge, whatever that faith is, anywhere in America, we will defend your right to practice it.
Yes, and it's important that we understand that, because if we say, well, we don't want you defending that particular faith or that particular religion, then we are really eliminating ourselves, because we want them all to be
That's exactly right.
protected so that we can maintain our freedom. Yes, absolutely. In our closing time here together, you've talked about you representing these cases around the country. One of the things you didn't say is that you do it pro bono. It's amazing. Attorney costs are usually prohibitive for the average American, and yet you guys do this, and you have a 90% rate of winning, over 90% rate of winning these cases, which is so commendable. Tell us how you operate, and if someone is being, if their religious freedoms are being threatened, how they could get more information about First Liberty.
Certainly. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, we are a 501c3. We are a nonprofit organization, so we're supported by donors around the country. And that allows us to never bill the client for the work that we do for them. And you're exactly right. These cases sometimes go on for years. The Bladensburg World War I memorial case, that I think was 6 years before we finally finished it at the Supreme Court. So, thousands and thousands of hours of legal work that if the client was being billed for it would be cost prohibitive. So our donors are very generous, and that allows us to never bill the client. Anyone that wants more information about First Liberty Institute should go to firstliberty.org. There's a wealth of information there. There's a lot of educational resources. The founders intended we the people to be the first defenders of our own rights, and you cannot defend your rights if you don't know what they are. So you can get a lot of information from our website. If you or somebody you know is facing a situation where you feel like your religious liberty is threatened, right at the top of the webpage, there's a little tab that says Get Legal Help. You can click on there, and there's a form where you can kind of fill out and give us the basics of what is going on, and then someone from our team will get in touch with you, and we'll talk through it, and we'll figure out if there's a way that we can help. So there's that. You can also, if your audience are text people, they can text the word liberty to 474747, and you'll get a text back with all the instructions on how to get in connection with us, and that will get you on our email list. I promise you we don't spam you to death. We send out a little newsletter update about once a week with updates on all of our cases around the country, everything from the big Supreme Court cases down to the little, protecting Ken Hauge in a senior living complex in Virginia. You'll get updates on all of that. So firstliberty.org is a great resource for you.
It truly is, and I would encourage folks to check out firstliberty.org. A great educational site. I mean, there are tabs there you can link on to learn all about your First Amendment rights, and like you say, the cases that are current, cases that are past. It really is very enlightening. And I tell you, as believers, I think it's imperative that we learn, that we make sure that our children know. They're not going to get it necessarily on the evening news. It's something that they're going to have to be intentional about learning. But it is fascinating to see what God is doing through your organization. I am blown away. I don't know if you happen to have a book there on your desk. You may not, and that's okay. But y'all put out a book each year that has the cases that you've dealt with throughout the year, and it's usually it looks like it's 3 or 4 inches high. It is a huge book. I think people would be shocked and amazed, Lathan, to see how many cases that y'all handle every year.
That's right. We do put out publications called Undeniable. I don't happen to have a copy of it. I'm in our little media studio today, but it is called Undeniable, and it is an index of all the attacks on religious liberty, and we update it each year with the new attacks each year. And it is not bedside reading. It will keep you up at night if you read that. I wouldn't suggest reading it right before you try to go to sleep. But It is a good resource, to show people just how extensive the attacks are. And we are, I believe in 2018, we were engaged in over 400 legal matters during the calendar year. Now, I'm not a math whiz. Fortunately, I'm married to one, but even I know that's more than one a day. It's a
Right,
lot.
right. That is
So
a lot. That is a lot.
yeah, they
Uh,
can find information about undeniable on the website as well.
yeah. Well, Lathan, thank you so much for joining us today. I know this has been enlightening for me, and I know that it has for our viewers as well. God bless you in the work that you're doing, and maybe we'll have you back to update us on some more cases that you've won in the days to come. And thanks for being with us today on Grace Cafe.